Fire, she challenged the wrong man, a mafia boss in disguise, Korean dark romance. Say that again. Jaehyun's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It simply landed. Quiet, precise, and cold enough to stop the entire cafe mid-breath. He was standing at the counter in a plain black hoodie, hands buried in his pockets, looking like a man who had nowhere important to be. No detail on him screamed danger. No watch, no ring, no shadow of bodyguards hovering at a respectful distance. Just a man. Ordinary. Forgettable. Except for the way the air around him felt heavier than it should. He had learned that trick young, how to shrink himself into the shape of nothing. How to walk through a crowded room without a single person realizing they had just been watched, assessed, and filed away. It was useful, that invisibility. Kept him sane. Seoul never stopped performing for him. Every room he entered became a stage. Every person in it, a player with an agenda dressed in courtesy. They smiled too wide. They laughed at the right moments. They wore their desperation like cologne. Strong enough to choke on, impossible to ignore. He had stopped trusting any of it years ago. Stopped trusting people years ago. So he came here. This quiet cafe tucked into an unremarkable corner of the city. No reservation required. No staff who recognized his face. No one who knew that the man ordering an Americano at the counter was, in reality, the silent force behind one of Seoul's most dangerous networks. Here he was no one, and he had needed that, until she happened. I said. The woman across from him repeated, arms crossed, chin lifted, voice completely, infuriatingly steady. You don't get to skip the line just because you think you're important. Someone nearby inhaled sharply. The barista went still. Jaehyun tilted his head. He studied her the way he studied everything, not with anger, but with the particular quiet attention of a man trying to understand something that did not fit his existing map of the world. She wasn't performing. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't scanning his face for a reaction, searching for the moment she'd gone too far. She simply meant what she said, and that was almost incomprehensible to him. He smiled, not warmly, the kind of smile that arrived after a long silence and made people immediately wish they had chosen different words. You don't know who I am, he said quietly. She shrugged. And you don't know how lines work. Now, if you already feel the tension building between these two and you need to know what happens when a woman with nothing to lose accidentally walks into the orbit of a man with everything to hide, go ahead and subscribe right now, drop a like, and get comfortable. Because this story doesn't slow down, it doesn't play safe, and it will absolutely not end the way you expect. 3 weeks after that first confrontation, Jaehyun was seated alone in a corner booth of a private lounge in Gangnam, reviewing territory movement reports on his phone with the same expression he wore for everything. Calm, unreadable, and faintly bored. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. Then it buzzed again. He glanced at the notification. A message from his building's front security desk. There is a woman here. She says the contract you signed has a clause error. She won't leave until it's corrected. Jaehyun read it twice, then set his phone face down on the table. His staff handled corrections. His staff handled everything. But a second message followed before he could return to his reports. Boss, she brought the contract. Printed. Highlighted. 3 copies. She says she'll wait. He almost laughed. Almost. He typed back. Tell her to leave it at the desk. The reply came in under 10 seconds. She says she won't sign a revised version without the original party present. She cited the clause number. She also said, and I'm quoting directly, I don't care who he is. Jaehyun stared at the screen. Something moved in his chest. Small. Unfamiliar. He reached for his jacket. He almost didn't go in. That was the part Jaehyun would never say out loud. That he had stood outside the glass door of that unremarkable cafe for exactly 3 seconds, watching the morning crowd move inside, and nearly turned around. He didn't need coffee. He needed quiet. And quiet, in his world, was the rarest thing alive. But something kept his feet moving forward. Some habit older than caution, the need, however brief, to exist somewhere no one was watching him with purpose. He pushed the door open. The smell hit first. ground beans and warm milk and something faintly sweet that had no business making a man like him slow his steps. He slowed anyway. The line wasn't long. For people. Maybe 5. He moved toward the counter with the same ease he moved through every room. Unhurried, unannounced, slipping naturally toward the front the way he always had. Not aggressively. Not obviously. Simply the way a man moves when he has never, in his adult life, been told to wait. He was almost at the counter when she spoke. "Excuse me." The voice came from his left. He didn't stop. "Hey!" Sharper now. "I said excuse me." Jae-hyun stopped. He turned slowly, not because the voice startled him but because something in it did. The complete, unhesitating certainty of it. No apology woven into the edges. No softening. Just words. Flat and direct and entirely unbothered. She was standing a full step behind him in the line. Arms crossed. Chin lifted at an angle that suggested this was not her first inconvenient conversation and would not be her last. Her bag was slung across one shoulder, slightly worn at the strap. Her eyes, when they met his, held the particular steady quality of someone who had long ago decided they had nothing to prove, and even longer ago stopped caring whether anyone agreed. "The line," she said, "starts back there." Jae-hyun looked at her. Then, almost imperceptibly, he tilted his head. "I don't think I skipped anything. You walked past 4 people. I was moving toward the counter. That's what skipping looks like." Someone nearby shifted uncomfortably. The barista found a very important reason to study the espresso machine. A man 2 places back in line suddenly became deeply interested in his phone. Jae-hyun studied her. Not with irritation. That would have required her to matter in the way threats mattered. This was different. This was the attention he gave to things that didn't follow any pattern he already knew. She wasn't performing bravery. There was no tremor beneath the steadiness. No micro-expression of fear quickly suppressed. She simply didn't know enough to be afraid. And somehow that made her the most unusual person in the room. "You don't know who I am," he said quietly. She shrugged. One shoulder. "Easy. Final. And you don't know how lines work." A pause settled between them. Not uncomfortable, at least not for her. She had already looked away, half turned back toward the menu board with the casual ease of someone who had said what needed saying and considered the matter complete. Jae-hyun felt something move through him. Not anger. Not amusement exactly. Something quieter than both. Something he didn't immediately have a name for. He stepped back. "After you," he said. She blinked. A single, small flicker of surprise that vanished almost immediately. "You're giving up that easily?" "For now." She studied him for one more second. Looking for the angle. Looking for whatever game was underneath the courtesy. She didn't find one. So she turned back to the counter, placed her order in a clear and unhurried. He watched, above all, for the moment most people couldn't resist. The glance back. That small, involuntary need to check. Did I go too far? Did I make an enemy? Did I miscalculate? The look every person eventually threw over their shoulder after a confrontation with a stranger whose energy they couldn't quite place. She walked to the door, pushed it open, stepped out into the gray soul morning, and never once looked back. Jae-hyun stood at the counter with his coffee going warm in his hand. The noise of the cafe rebuilt itself around him. Conversation, the hiss of steam, the barista calling a name, someone laughing near the window. The world moved on without pause the way it always did. But something had snagged. Something small. Something he had not felt in a long time and could not, standing there in a plain black hoodie in an unremarkable cafe, immediately explain. She didn't look back. Not once. He turned that fact over slowly, the way he turned over anything that didn't fit the shape of what he expected. Everyone looked back. Everyone. It was human nature, the need to measure the weight of what you just walked away from. The need to confirm you were still safe, still unseen, still uncalculated. But she hadn't, which meant one of 2 things. Either she was braver than she had any reason to be, or she simply genuinely did not care. And Jae-hyun, who had spent years surrounded by people who cared too much about his name, his money, his power, the shadow he cast in rooms he hadn't even entered yet, found he could not stop thinking about which one it was. He told himself he went back for the coffee. That was the story he gave himself on the third morning, pulling on the same black hoodie, taking the same unremarkable route through the same quiet streets toward the same cafe that had at least a dozen better alternatives within walking distance. The coffee was good. That was all. He wasn't looking for her. But she was there. Same spot near the counter. Same worn bag strap. Same quality of stillness that had nothing performative about it. No phone raised, no careful arrangement of herself for the benefit of the room. Just Hannah, waiting for her order, completely indifferent to everything around her. Jaehyun took a seat near the window and opened nothing, read nothing, looked at nothing in particular. He simply sat, and without meaning to, without deciding to, he watched. It happened quickly. "Your card declined," the barista said, with the specific careful tone people used when they wanted to deliver embarrassment gently. Hannah didn't flinch. "Try it again." The machine beeped. The sound was small, definitive, declined. The line behind her had grown without announcement. Someone muttered something low. Someone else shifted impatiently. The particular cruelty of public inconvenience, small, ordinary, and sharp as a paper cut. Hannah's jaw tightened. Just once. Just slightly. "I'll sort it," she said calmly, stepping aside. "One moment." She dug through her bag with the focused efficiency of someone who refused to let the moment become larger than it was. No apology broadcast to the room. No performance of distress. Just a woman solving a problem. Jaehyun was already standing before he decided to stand. "I'll cover it." She turned. And for the first time since the line incident 3 days ago, she looked directly at him. Really looked the way you look at something you recognize but weren't expecting. "No," she said. "It's just coffee." "I said no." He held her gaze. "You'd rather walk away empty-handed?" "I'd rather owe nobody." The words landed differently than she intended them to. He could tell she meant them practically. A simple statement of preference, clean and without drama. But Jaehyun heard something else underneath. Not pride. Pride was loud, defensive, easily bruised. This was something older and quieter. A principle so deeply settled into her that she didn't even need to raise her voice around it. "I'd rather owe nobody." He had known people who said versions of that sentence. Usually they were lying, performing independence while quietly keeping score, building debts they'd call in later under a different name. He sat back down. "Suit yourself." She left without her coffee, without complaint, without looking back. He found out her name that night. It didn't take long. It never did. "Hannah." He repeated it once, silently, then kept reading. Worked 2 jobs, a small design studio during the day, something part-time in the evenings. Lived alone in a modest apartment on the quieter edge of the city. No family connections worth noting. No financial backing. No powerful name attached to hers anywhere in any record that mattered. No leverage. No weakness. Nothing that should have made her interesting to a man like him. And yet, he closed the file and sat for a long time in the dark of his office, the city glittering uselessly 40 floors below, and turned the problem of her over slowly in his mind. Everyone had something they wanted from him. Everyone he had ever met, without exception, had carried some version of need beneath whatever face they showed him. Money, protection, access, validation. Even the ones who pretended otherwise eventually revealed the shape of their hunger. Hannah had refused free coffee. Free coffee. He almost laughed. He didn't. Instead, he pulled up his secondary contacts and typed a single, brief instruction. There was a design studio. Small. Unremarkable. He wanted a contract placed. Anonymous, high value, urgent. Specifically requesting her. He closed his laptop. Stood. Walked to the window. The city had no idea what he'd just decided. Neither yet did she. The contract was real. That was the first thing Hannah told herself when the studio director slid the folder across the desk with barely contained excitement. "This is real, this is legitimate. Read every line before you sign anything." She read every line. Twice. The scope was serious. The deadline aggressive but achievable. The payment, she read that number 3 times, was the kind that didn't arrive at small studios without a reason attached. They requested you specifically, her director said. Why? Does it matter? Hannah looked up. It always matters. But the contract was clean. She'd checked. And the work itself was the kind she was good at, the kind she'd been doing for 2 years in a studio that mostly noticed her output without noticing her. Someone had seen something. That happened sometimes. She signed it. She was mid-sentence when she walked into the conference room. Tablet open. Notes already pulled up. The particular forward momentum of someone who treated preparation as a form of armor and had no patience for rooms that weren't ready to work. She got 3 words out before she saw him. And stopped. He was seated at the head of the table, jacket this time, no hoodie, though the stillness was identical. That same quality of occupying space without announcing it. Hands rested loosely on the table. Expression giving away precisely nothing. He watched her stop. You. The word came out flat. Me, Jaehyun said. The silence lasted exactly as long as Hannah needed to make a decision. Jaehyun counted it, 3 seconds, maybe 4, watched her weigh the situation, file it, and set it aside in favor of the work. She crossed her arms. You're the client. For now. Her eyes narrowed slightly at that, the for now, but she didn't ask. She pulled out the chair across from him, not beside him, and sat down with her tablet positioned between them like a small, professional boundary. This better not be some kind of joke. Do I look like I joke? She considered him with the same directness she'd used in the cafe. No performance of politeness, no careful social softening. No, she said finally. Good. Then let's begin. He asked intelligent questions. That was the first thing that unsettled her. Not his presence, not the strangeness of the coincidence, but the quality of his attention. He had read the brief thoroughly. He pushed back on 2 of her preliminary ideas with specific structural reasoning. He didn't perform authority. He simply exercised it quietly, in the way of someone who had been making consequential decisions for a very long time. Hannah adjusted. She was good at adjusting. The color language here, he said, tapping one of her concept boards, is safe. The brief asked for accessible. Accessible doesn't mean invisible. She looked at him. He looked back. Push it, he said simply. Something moved through her, not irritation exactly. More like the specific friction of being understood just accurately enough to be inconvenient. I'll revise it, she said. I know. She wrote the note harder than necessary. The meeting ran 40 minutes. Professional. Productive. Almost normal. Almost. Because Jaehyun asked his questions and reviewed her concepts and said the right things at the right intervals. And the entire time, beneath all of it, he was watching her the way he'd watched her in the cafe. Not her face. Her reactions. The way she defended her work without apology. The way she conceded when the logic demanded it, cleanly without wounded ego, moving straight to solutions. The way she never once tried to charm him, impress him, or read the room for what he wanted to hear. She just worked. Like he was anyone. Like this was any room. At the end, she closed her tablet, gathered her things, and stood. I'll have the revision to you by Thursday. Wednesday. A beat. Wednesday, she agreed. And then, almost under her breath, you're going to be difficult, aren't you? It wasn't a question. Jaehyun said nothing. But as she walked to the door, professional, composed, entirely unbothered, something settled into the back of his mind with the quiet finality of a door closing. She had just agreed to work with him. She didn't know yet what that meant. He was only beginning to understand it himself. He noticed things. That was the problem. Jaehyun had always been observant. It was less a skill than a survival mechanism, built young and sharpened across years of rooms where missing a detail could mean missing everything. He noticed exits. He noticed hands. He noticed the precise moment a person's expression said one thing while their eyes said another. He had never particularly noticed whether someone had eaten lunch. Until her. It was the 3rd session. Wednesday. Late afternoon. The revision she'd delivered had been good, better than good, though he hadn't said so directly, which she had clearly registered and equally clearly decided not to pursue. They were working through the 2nd phase when he noticed her reach for her coffee, find it empty, and set it down without comment. Noticed the way she folded slightly forward over her tablet. Barely perceptible, the kind of shift that meant nothing unless you were already watching. He glanced at the time. Nearly 7. You didn't eat today, he said. She looked up sharply. That's not your business. I'm stating an observation. Observe something else. He said nothing further. But the next afternoon, when Hannah arrived at the conference room, there was a container on the table beside her usual seat. Simple, unremarkable, still warm. She stared at it, then at him. He was already reviewing documents and did not look up. She didn't touch it. The day after, it was there again. And the day after that. Always warm. Always placed without announcement, without instruction, without any of the performance of generosity that would have made it easier to refuse cleanly. It simply appeared. Like it was nothing. Like she was nothing meaning. Like she was someone whose ordinary comfort was worth the thought, with no transaction attached. That bothered her more than a grand gesture would have. On the 4th day, she looked across the table and said, "You're not going to stop."
No.
Why? Jaehyun set down his pen. He looked at her with that particular quality of attention she still hadn't found a name for. Not invasive, not warm exactly, just complete. Like she had his entire focus and none of his performance. "Because you're the only person in this room," he said, "who doesn't want anything from me." She frowned. "That's not true. I want the contract paid on time. That's work. That's different." "Is it?" "Yes." He held her gaze. "So what do you want, Hannah? Outside of work? Outside of the contract? What do you actually want?" The question landed with unexpected weight. She opened her mouth, and nothing came. Not because she was shy. Not because she was caught off guard by the intimacy of it. But because somewhere in the honest searching of her own answer, she found the question larger than she'd expected. And the silence that followed felt uncomfortably like something real. She closed her mouth, looked back at her tablet. "We should finish the 3rd section." Jaehyun watched her for a moment longer than necessary, then picked up his pen. "We should," he agreed. She ate the food that evening. Alone, after he'd gone. When the room was empty and there was no one to observe the small surrender of it. She told herself it was practical. She told herself it meant nothing. But walking home through the lit Seoul streets, Hannah turned the afternoon over slowly and arrived, reluctantly, at something she didn't entirely want to examine. He noticed things, quiet things, specific things, the kind of things people only noticed when they were paying a quality of attention that had nothing to do with business. And that, more than the food, more than the question, more than the way he'd looked at her when she couldn't answer, that was what unsettled her. Because Jaehyun, in every interaction, presented himself as controlled, professional, contained. But contained things, Hannah knew, were only interesting because of what was inside them. And whatever was inside him, she was increasingly certain, was nothing close to ordinary. It was the small things she noticed first. The way he checked his phone twice in the last 20 minutes of their session. Not casually, the way people checked for messages, but with a particular focused stillness, like he was reading weather and didn't like the forecast. The way he'd repositioned his chair slightly during the final hour. Barely noticeable. Angled, she realized now, toward the door. The way he said, when they finally wrapped at 10:30, "I'll walk you out." Not as a courtesy. As a decision already made. She'd almost argued. She hadn't. The building was quiet at that hour. The lobby staff offered the particular muted efficiency of people paid to be invisible, and Jaehyun moved through it the way he moved through everything. Unhurried, unannounced, one hand loose at his side. Hannah walked beside him and said nothing. The street outside was slick from earlier rain, the city lights catching in long, broken reflections across the pavement. Seoul at this hour had a specific quality. Still alive but turned inward, the daytime performance of itself replaced by something quieter and less certain. She was reaching for her phone to call a car when she felt him stop. Not slow down. Stop. The way a person stops when their body has registered something before their mind has finished processing it. She followed his gaze. A black car sat at the far end of the street. Engine running. No movement. Positioned at an angle that had no casual explanation. Not parked, not passing through, not waiting for anyone with ordinary intentions. "Do you know them?" she asked. Jaehyun said nothing, which was its own answer. "What's going on?" "Get behind me." His voice was different. That was the first thing, so immediate and so complete that it stopped her next breath. The quiet, measured cadence she had catalogued across weeks of conference rooms and careful conversation was simply gone. What replaced it wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was flat, and final, and deeply, deeply serious. "Jaehyun. Hannah." He didn't look at her. "Behind me. Now." She moved. The car door opened. 3 men, well-dressed. The particular careful blankness of people paid to cause harm without expression. The one in front looked at Hannah briefly, then dismissed her. "We're not here for you," he said. Her stomach dropped. Beside her, except he wasn't beside her anymore. He had already moved. It was the efficiency of it that she couldn't process. No warning. No escalation. No moment where it might have gone another way. Jaehyun moved through the space between them like he had already mapped it. Every angle calculated, every step deliberate, nothing wasted. The first man didn't finish his sentence. The second reached for something at his jacket and didn't reach it. The third had a full second of understanding what was happening before it stopped mattering. It was over before her mind had properly registered it had begun. The silence afterward was louder than anything. Hannah stood on the wet pavement and stared. Her pulse was loud in her ears. Her breath had gone shallow without her permission. Every reasonable, practical, sensible part of her was trying to locate a framework for what she had just watched and finding nothing. No category. No explanation that fit the man she thought she knew. He turned slowly. His breathing was controlled. His expression was the one she recognized. Composed, contained, unreadable. But his eyes were different. Something moved through them when they found her face. Something quick and complicated that arrived and was gone before she could name it. Almost like regret. She found her voice. "Who are you?" The question was barely above a whisper. Jaehyun looked at her for a long moment. The city moved quietly around them, indifferent and unhurried, the way cities always were. He said nothing, and somehow, that was the most frightening answer of all. He walked her to the corner. Not home. He didn't offer and she didn't ask. But away from the street, away from the 3 men he'd left in arrangements she was deliberately not examining, into the quieter mouth of a side road where the lights were softer and the city noise became something distant and manageable. Then he stopped. "Go home, Hannah." She looked at him. "No." His jaw tightened, the first visible crack in the composure, small and immediate and quickly controlled. "This isn't a conversation." "You're right," she said. "It's an explanation. And you owe me one." For a long moment he said nothing. She watched him make the calculation, could see it or thought she could in the quality of his stillness. The same stillness she'd catalogued across weeks of conference rooms, except now she understood it differently. It wasn't calm. It had never been calm. It was control. The constant, deliberate management of something that had no business being in ordinary spaces. "My name," he said finally, "is not important. That's not an explanation. What I am," he continued as though she hadn't spoken, "is not something you want detail on. What you saw tonight, that is not an exception. That is not unusual. That is the shape of my life, Hannah. And anyone who moves close to that shape becomes visible to people who should never know they exist." She absorbed this, practically, quietly. So those men were a message from people who want something I won't give them. A pause. "It won't be the last one." The street was very still around them. "And the contract," she said slowly. "The studio. All of it." Something shifted in his face. Just slightly. Just enough. "Was it even real?" she asked. "The work was real." "That's not what I asked." He held her gaze. "No. It wasn't coincidence." She exhaled. Not dramatically, not with the shock he might have expected. Just a slow, considered breath, like someone reorganizing a room after furniture has been moved. "So what am I now?" she asked. The question was quiet, direct, completely without self-pity. Jaehyun looked at her for a long moment. My biggest mistake, he said. She should have left then. Every logical, practical, self-preserving part of her knew it. She'd heard what he was, or enough of it. She'd seen what he was capable of with her own eyes on a wet street 20 minutes ago. She had no connections, no safety net, no reason in the world to remain standing in a dark side road with a man who had just described her as a liability. She stayed. You're trying to push me away, she said. I'm trying to protect you.
No.
Her voice was quiet but certain. You're afraid. That landed. She saw it, the almost imperceptible stillness that moved through him, different from his usual control. This wasn't management. This was impact. You don't know what you're saying. I think I do. She took one step closer. Not aggressive, not naive, simply unwilling to perform a distance she didn't feel. You decided I was a mistake before I could decide anything. That's not protection. That's just fear wearing a better jacket. His expression darkened. If you stay close to me, he said quietly, you become a target. That is not metaphor. That is not me being dramatic. People will use you to get to me, and they will not be careful about it. I heard you. Then go home. I heard you, she repeated. And I'm still standing here. The silence between them shifted quality, became something heavier, more honest, less manageable than either of them had intended. You don't get to decide what risks I take, she said softly. Not for me. Jaehyun looked at her. Really looked, the way he almost never let himself look at anything he couldn't afford to want. You don't know what staying means, he said. His voice, for the first time, had something underneath it. Something unguarded and briefly, dangerously real. Hannah met his gaze. Then show me. The street held its breath. And Jaehyun, who had dismantled threats and managed empires, and built his entire existence around never being caught without an answer, had nothing. It happened on a Tuesday. Ordinary in every way that mattered. Gray sky, moderate traffic. The particular unremarkable rhythm of a city that didn't know it was about to become the backdrop for the thing Jaehyun had spent weeks trying to prevent. Hannah left the studio at 6:17. He knew this because he always knew. Not obtrusively, he had never placed anything near her that felt like surveillance, had been deliberate about that boundary in a way he couldn't entirely explain, but he had people whose job was the perimeter. Loose, discreet, far enough back that she'd never feel watched. Far enough back it turned out to be useless. The first signal was a missed check-in at 6:40. Jaehyun was in a meeting when it came through. He read the message once, finished his sentence and stood up. The meeting ended without him. By 6:50 he had 3 pieces of information. Her phone was offline. The discreet tail he'd assigned had lost visual at a transit junction 2 blocks from her apartment. And a car matching the description of the one from the previous week had been flagged on street footage moving parallel to her route. He was already in the car before the 4th piece arrived. Hannah had noticed the man at 6:30. Not because she was looking. Had spent the walk deliberately not looking for things that would remind her of wet pavements and black cars and explanations that rearranged everything. But he had been there at the studio exit. And at the corner. And again, half a block later, with the specific non-casualness of someone performing casualness badly. She kept walking, faster, thinking, practically, stubbornly, the way she thought through everything. Next street, busier road, stay visible. She made it 1 more block. The car came from the side street. It wasn't loud. That was almost the worst part. No drama, no screech of tires. Just a vehicle that stopped exactly beside her and 2 men who moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this before and expected no complications. She was 1. They were 2. She fought anyway. They put her in a room. Clean. Quiet. A chair and a table and a single light and the specific, suffocating intelligence of a situation designed to communicate one thing clearly. You are leverage. She wasn't blindfolded. That told her something. They either didn't care what she saw, or they didn't expect her to need the information later. She filed that away and breathed. Think. She had no phone. No bag. The door was solid and the single man outside it hadn't spoken. She thought about Jaehyun. Not with fear. Not with the helpless, spiraling quality of someone waiting to be rescued, but with the particular, exhausting clarity of a person who had been right and wrong simultaneously. Right that he was dangerous, wrong that the danger would stay neatly on his side of the distance she tried to maintain. She had chosen to stay. This was what staying meant. She exhaled slowly and waited. Jaehyun found the location in 40 minutes. Not through panic. Panic was a luxury that got people killed, and he had excised it from himself so long ago he couldn't remember what it felt like. He found it through the cold, systematic dismantling of every connection between the car, the men, and the organization behind them, working backward through 3 layers of deliberately obscured ownership until the address surfaced like something dredged from deep water. Then he sat in the car outside for 11 seconds. Not hesitating, calculating. The man beside him, his most trusted, his longest standing, said nothing. Knew better. 2 exits, Jaehyun said quietly. For men minimum, 2 inside. She'll be interior, ground floor, they want access, not distance. He checked nothing. He already knew. Nobody moves until I say. Nobody leaves until I say. A pause. And if she has a single mark on her. He stopped. Didn't finish. Didn't need to. It was precise. It was fast. It was the most controlled thing he had ever done in his life, because somewhere in that building was the only person in years who had looked at him like he was ordinary, and the thought of what fear might have done to that particular quality in her eyes was the closest thing to unbearable he had felt in a very long time. He found her in the 3rd room, sitting upright in the chair, hands in her lap, jaw set, eyes, when they found his across the room, sharp and exhausted and furious and entirely, stubbornly intact. "You're late," she said. Something moved through Jaehyun's chest. Vast and complicated and completely unmanageable. "Are you hurt?" She stood, slowly, favoring her left side in a way she was clearly trying not to show. He crossed the room in 4 steps. "Hannah, I'm fine." Her voice was steady. Her hands, when he reached for them, were cold. "I'm fine." He looked at her, at the careful composure she was holding together through sheer, characteristic refusal to be anything other than upright, and felt his jaw tighten with something that had no clean name. Not rage, not relief, both simultaneously in a combination that had no clean name. "I told you," he said quietly. She looked up at him. "I know," she said. A pause. "I'd still make the same choice." He didn't speak in the car. Neither did she. The city moved past the windows in long, indifferent streaks of light, and Hannah sat with her hands folded in her lap and her shoulder aching in the specific deep way that meant tomorrow would be worse, and said nothing, because there was too much to say and the inside of a moving car at midnight was not the right architecture for any of it. Jaehyun watched the road. Or appeared to. His apartment was not what she expected. Quiet. Spare. The kind of space that had been designed for function and never quite accumulated the small, accidental details that made places feel lived in. No photographs. Nothing unnecessary on any surface. It looked like a room that belonged to a man who had never expected to stay anywhere long enough to unpack. She sat on the sofa without being asked. He brought her water, then a cloth for her shoulder, and then stood with his back to the window in a posture she recognized. The one he used when he was deciding how much to give. "Say it," she said. "You should rest." Jaehyun. He looked at her. And for the first time, the very first time across all the conference rooms and cafe counters and dark streets and everything that had accumulated between them, he looked tired. Not physically. Through. Like something that had been held at considerable effort for a very long time had simply, quietly put itself down. "I knew this would happen," he said. "I know you did. I told you. I know what you told me." She held his gaze steadily. "Say the thing you haven't told me." The silence lasted long enough that she thought he wouldn't. Then, "I haven't been afraid of anything," he said slowly. "In a very long time. Not really. Fear requires something worth losing." He paused. "I had made sure, very deliberately, that I had nothing worth losing." The room was very still. "And then you argued with me about a line in a cafe," he continued, quieter now. "And you refused my money. And you corrected my contract in a lobby with 3 printed copies. And you," he stopped, looked away briefly, looked back. You just kept being exactly what you were, without apology and without performance, and I didn't know what to do with that. I still don't. Hannah said nothing. Let it land. Let it exist in the room without rushing to cover it. You changed something, he said. I don't have better language for it than that. Something that had been a specific way for a long time changed. And tonight, when the location came through and I didn't know if you were, he stopped again. His jaw tightened. I have managed a great deal of difficult things, he said carefully. Those 11 seconds outside that building were the hardest. She stood, slowly. Her shoulder protested and she ignored it, crossing the room until she was close enough that looking away would have required a decision. I knew you weren't ordinary, she said. From the first day. I couldn't name it, but I knew something was different about you. That should have made you leave. Probably. Why didn't you? She considered him, the composed, contained, carefully constructed man who had just quietly and without drama told her she was the first thing he'd been afraid to lose in years. Because underneath all of it, she said, you looked at me like I was a person, not a resource, not a variable, just a person. A pause. You have no idea how rare that is. Something moved across his face. Unguarded, brief, entirely real. He reached out. Slowly, with the particular careful quality of someone handling something they didn't want to damage, and tucked a strand of hair from her face. I don't do halfway, he said quietly. I know. She didn't move away. I don't either. My world doesn't become simpler, Hannah. What happened tonight, that doesn't resolve cleanly. There will be more of it. I know that too. And you're still. I'm still here, she said. I'm standing in your apartment at midnight with a bruised shoulder and I'm still here. What does that tell you? He looked at her for a long moment. The city glittered beyond the window, vast and indifferent and entirely unaware of the two people standing in the quiet of a spare apartment deciding, without fanfare, that something was worth the cost of it. You challenged the wrong man, he murmured. It was almost a question, almost a warning, almost the beginning of something that had, in truth, already begun a long time ago in an unremarkable cafe over a line neither of them could have known would lead here. Hannah looked up at him, didn't move, didn't hesitate. Maybe, she said softly, then met his eyes. But I think I chose the right one. And Jaehyun, who had built an empire on certainty, who had dismantled threats without pause, who had spent years making sure that nothing and no one could reach the part of him that could be broken, said nothing, because for the first time in longer than he could honestly remember, he didn't need to. She was already there. And this time, he didn't step back. If you enjoyed the story this far, don't let it end here. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next chapter and enjoy more story from us. And if this story gave you chills, drop a like and share it with someone who loves powerful romance with a dangerous edge. Your support keeps these stories coming. Thank you.